Welcome to the lecture on cardiovascular system. The function of cardiovascular system is to transport blood, which contain gases, nutrients, and other substances to different parts of the body. In order to do this job, cardiovascular system is made of a central organ which acts as a pump, and that is a heart. And then there are also channels that guide blood to different parts of the body, and those are blood vessels. There are three large groups of blood vessels. We have arteries, which carry blood away from the heart. Then we have veins, which carry blood toward the heart. And then we have capillaries, which connect arteries and veins. In human beings, the cardiovascular system is a closed circuit. And there are actually two circuits. We have pulmonary circuit, which carries oxygen poor blood, where it picks up oxygen and drops off carbon dioxide. And then there is a systemic circuit which sends oxygen-rich blood to all body cells where they drop off oxygen and picks up carbon dioxide. First, let's talk about the heart. So heart is a muscular organ which acts as a pump to transport blood to different parts of the body. The heart is located in thoracic cavity, and to be specific, it's located in mediastinum. Mediastinum is the space between two lungs. So in the chest, we have the right lung and the left lung. And then between the two lungs, we have a space. That space is called mediastinum. There you will find the heart. If we pay attention to the shape of the heart has a somewhat cone shape. It has a base where you find the large blood vessel, and it has a tip or apex of the heart. The base of the heart is beneath the second rib, and the tip or the apex of the heart extends to the fifth intercostal space. In terms of organs surrounding the heart, anteriorly we have the heart surrounded by sternum and the cartilaginous part of the ribs. On both sides of the heart, we have lungs. Posteriorly, we have visceral organs such as thoracic aorta, esophagus, and also the spinal column. And then inferiorly, we have the diaphragm, which separates the thoracic cavity from abdominal pelvic cavity. Next, let's discuss the coverings of the heart. And the coverings of the heart is called pericardium. So there are two layers: an external layer, which is a tough connective tissue. It is called fibrous pericardium. And then there is a relatively delicate layer that is called serous pericardium. So then serous pericardium is actually further made of two layers. There's one layer which is firmly attached to the muscle of the heart. That is called the visceral layer of serous pericardium. And then it is actually the same layer, but it's reflected outside, and it's not further connected to or attached to the muscle of the heart, and it's called parietal pericardium. So in summary, there are two coverings. The outer covering is called fibrous pericardium, and the inner covering, which is relatively delicate, is called serous pericardium. Serous pericardium is further divided into two layers, and those are visceral layer and parietal layers. Between the two layers of serous pericardium, there's a tiny space which is called pericardial cavity. Usually there's a little bit of fluid which kind of facilitate the movement of the heart and also avoid friction. But sometimes fluid or blood builds up there, and that kind of compromise the heart contraction and relaxation, and that condition is called cardiac tamponade. I want to add that the function of the coverings of the heart or pericardium is not only to cover the heart, protect the heart, but also anchor the heart and the major vessels to the surrounding organs. So next we have the layers of heart. So if we make a section of the heart and study it under a microscope, you will see that there are three layers. From inside to outside, these layers are endocardium, myocardium, and epicardium. The endocardium is actually made of simple squamous epithelial cells. They are smooth and it is in contact with blood. Myocardium is made of cardiac muscle, and this layer basically contracts, and that allow the heart to pump blood to different parts of the body. And then the outer layer, which is made of connective tissue, called epicardium. I want to clarify something which students usually find confusing. So there's actually one structure, but the same structure has two names. So one name is epicardium, but if you pay attention, epicardium is actually the visceral layer of serous pericardium. So don't get confused. This layer has two names. One name is epicardium, the other name is visceral layer of serous pericardium. So now let's discuss the internal structure of the heart. So as you can see in this slide, the heart is made of four chambers. You have two upper chambers, which are called atria, and two lower chambers, which are called ventricles. The two ventricles and the two atria are separated from each other. The structure which separated the ventricles from each other is called interventricular septum. And similarly, there's a structure which separates the atria. Right now it's not visible, so I'm going to just ignore that at this minute. I also want to walk you through that there are several large blood vessels, but let's put it this way. So let's start from the right atrium. Right atrium is actually the first part of the heart, or the first chamber of the heart, which receives oxygen poor blood from different parts of the body. We have these two large blood vessels. One is called superior vena cava, which brings oxygen poor blood from the upper part of the body, and then inferior vena cava, which brings oxygen poor blood from the inferior part of the body. Both of these large blood vessels drain in the right atrium. Then blood moves from right atrium to the right ventricle. Between the two chambers, there is a valve which prevents the backward flow. This valve is called a tricuspid valve, because this valve is made of three leaflets, and leaflets are called cuspids, so that's why this valve is called tricuspid valve. Then the blood from the right ventricle is pumped to this large blood vessel, which is called pulmonary trunk, and then pulmonary trunk divides into two branches. We have the left pulmonary artery and right pulmonary artery, and from here the blood goes to the lungs. Understand that the reason we are calling this blood vessel pulmonary artery, although it has oxygen poor blood, is because the blood vessel carries the blood away from the heart. In the blood, oxygenation occur, means the blood picks up oxygen and get rid of carbon dioxide and return back to the heart through left and right pulmonary veins. These blood vessels drain into the left atrium. So left atrium is the first part, or is the first chamber of the heart which receives oxygen filled blood, or blood which is full of oxygen. Then the blood moves from left atrium to left ventricle. There is a valve between these two, and that is the bicuspid valve, because it has two leaflets. There's another name for this valve as well, and that is mitral valve. Mitral valve or bicuspid valve prevents backflow of blood from the left ventricle to the left atrium. Once blood gets to the left ventricle, then the blood is pumped to this large blood vessel, which is called aorta, and from the aorta the blood is distributed to different parts of their body. So I identified two valves, the tricuspid and bicuspid valve. It's important for you to know the location of these valves, where it's located. So for example, tricuspid valve is located between right atrium and right ventricle. But it's also important for you to understand the function of it. So the function of tricuspid valve is to prevent backflow of blood from right ventricle to the right atrium. There are also two other valves. So one is called pulmonary valve. The location of pulmonary valve is between right ventricle and pulmonary trunk. And there's a fourth valve, and that's called aortic valve. It's not visible in this slide, but you can assume that it's at the beginning of the aorta and ventricle. It's between the left ventricle and the beginning of aorta. There are a few other structures. So for example, the cuspid valves, which include tricuspid valve and bicuspid valve, they're attached to the wall of ventricles through these cord-like structures. These cord-like structures are called chorda tendineae. Chorda tendineae are attached to these finger-like projections on the wall of ventricles. These finger-like projections are called papillary muscles. This slide shows the four valves of the heart. So here we are seeing a kind of a transverse view of the heart. We have the cuspid valves, and here you can count the cusp. So there are 3 leaflets. So this is going to be your tricuspid valve, and here you got 2 cusps. This is going to be your bicuspid valve or mitral valve. We also can see the pulmonary valve, which is located anteriorly, and behind or posterior to pulmonary valve you see the aortic valve. So aortic valve and pulmonary valve is slightly different than the cuspid valves. They are made of kind of a half moon shaped structure, so that's why the aortic valve and pulmonary valves are also called semilunar valves. The heart pumps the blood and sends it to different parts of the body. It also sends blood to itself, and there are 2 blood vessels which carry the blood to the muscles of the heart. These blood vessels are called coronary arteries, and there are 2 of them. One is the right coronary artery, and the other one is left coronary artery. So in this slide, we are looking at the external view of the heart. We can see the heart itself and also the large blood vessels. So for example, here we see the superior vena cava, which brings oxygen, poor blood from the upper part of the body, which includes head, neck, and the upper part of the trunk and also upper extremities. And then the inferior vena cava brings the blood from the bring oxygen, poor blood from the inferior part of the body, and that includes lower extremities, lower pelvis, abdomen, and the lower part of the trunk. We can see the aorta, which is the largest blood vessel. The aorta leaves the left ventricle, and through aorta, blood is distributed to different parts of our body. Here we see this air-like or air-shaped structure. This is called the auricle. This is the right auricle. Right auricle corresponds to the right atrium, and the left auricle corresponds to the left atrium. You can see the coronary arteries are also visible. Coronary artery run in a space between the auricles and the ventricle. This space is called coronary sulcus. Okay, so here we can look at the right coronary artery. Left coronary artery is not that much visible. This part indicates or represents the right ventricle. The left ventricle is shown here. Between the right and left ventricle, there is a sulcus or a groove that's called interventricular sulcus. In the interventricular sulcus, we see the blood vessels. So, for example, an important branch of left coronary artery is called the anterior interventricular artery. This artery is also called left anterior descending artery. That is found there. Also, you find the venous blood vessels or the veins of the heart as well. So this is the posterior view of the heart. Again, we are looking at the left atrium, right atrium, left ventricle, right ventricle, some large blood vessels such as superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, and aorta. We can also see right and left pulmonary artery and right and left pulmonary veins. You can also see the coronary sulcus, where you find the blood vessel of the heart. So as I said, the oxygenated blood for the heart is supplied through coronary arteries, and then the oxygen poor blood or the venous blood of the heart is drained by coronary veins, and coronary veins eventually drain into this larger vein, which is called coronary sinus, and then coronary sinus finally drain into the right atrium.